In this video, we are going to print up this pattern in greater than or equal to 5 ways, basic to advanced. Okay. So first of all, in the first method, we are going to use two loops, one for the rows. So let's write the loops here first. And the inner two loops, we are going to use two inner loops here. The inner two loops will be one for the spaces, okay, and one for printing these numbers. All right. First of all, let's call it method 1 here. Okay, so this is the method 1, and let's put in the values here. For I is the number of rows, so we have 5 rows, so we are going to put the values of I from 1 to 6 not inclusive. Okay, so values of I will go from 1 to 5, and now in the inner loops the range of j must be from 5 to I, comma, as we are decrementing the values, so we are going to use a negative of 1 here. So let's understand why we did this. Okay, in the first iteration, when I is equal to 1, the inner loop j, that is for the spaces, will go from 5 to 1 not inclusive. So the values of j will be from 5 to 2, that is 5, 4, 3, 2, that is we will be having 4 values. So we are going to print 4 spaces here in the first row. So we are going to use a print statement here, and inside the print statement, print a space, comma, and equals double quotes. Okay, so here what this statement does is it will print a space, then it will make sure that the next iteration should begin from the same row itself. It should not go into the next row. All right, so that's why we are using AND here. And now for the second inner loop, that is for printing these numbers. Now you can recognize that the numbers in each row are the same. They are not different. I mean, in the first row it is I, that is the same number. Second row we have 2. Third row we have 3. Fourth 4. And in the fifth row we have 5. So make sure you use a print statement here, and inside that you are going to print this I. Because in the first iteration I is equal to 1 and we have to print 1 here. In the second iteration I is equal to 2 and we have to print 2 in the second iteration. So in here we are not going to use the double quotes here. Instead that we use I, comma, and equals single quotes or double quotes, whichever you prefer. Okay, and the range of k will be going from 0 to I. So when I is equal to 1, the second inner loop will go from 0 to 1 not inclusive. That is, it will go from 0 to 0, that is only a single time. So we will be having 1 printed here. In the second iteration, when I is equal to 2, it will go from 0 to 2 not inclusive, that is 0 and 1. So the inner loop, the second one, will execute 2 times and it will print 2 times. Alright. So this AND we are using here so that these 2 or multiple values are printed in the same row itself. Alright. So we don't want in the next iteration that the loop prints in the same line itself. Okay. So we are going to use a print statement here which will make sure that the next iteration of the outer loop goes into the next line. And let's execute it now. And here we have the required pattern. Okay, so what if we want to separate these 2 or 3 elements in here? So we are going to increase the space here and give it a space here also, and execute now. Now we have like this one with the space in here. Okay, so what if we want to generalize this pattern? We will take a variable n equals 5 here. We are going to put n plus 1 not inclusive here, n, and that is it. Let's print it now. Make it 7 and you can see the same required pattern. Alright, so we have generalized it also. Now in the method 2 we are going to reduce the number of lines here, okay, and number of loops also. So the outer loop will be same for the rows and it will go from 1 to 6, that is 1 to 5, 6 not inclusive, and inside that we will be having only one loop this time for printing both the spaces and the numbers. All right, and here we are going to use an if condition. So first of all, let's put the values of j here. The j will go from 5 to 0, not inclusive, comma, negative of 1, that it's decreasing. I will make you understand this, but first let me put the if conditions here. If I is greater than or equal to j, print the numbers here, that is I, comma, and equals in the single quotes, no spaces. But if we want a space like in here in between the numbers, so you put a space in here, else you have to print a space here. Okay, 2 spaces, comma, and equals single quotes. And to make sure it goes into the next line in the next iteration of the outer loop, we're using a print statement here. Okay, so now let's understand these values. Okay, what this inner code does. So when I is equal to 1, the inner loop will go from 5 to 0, that is 5 times, because 0 is not inclusive here. Okay, so it will go from 5, 4, 3, 2 and 1, that is 5 times. So we are running the inner loop, that is for the columns, for 5 times. So in the each iteration it will be running 5 times. Now we have to give a condition that when we have to print the spaces and when we have to print the numbers. So when I, that is I is equal to 1, is greater than or equal to j, but when j is equal to 5, this condition is false. So we print 2 spaces here like this. Okay, and now j value decrements to 4. So 1 is not greater than 4, so this statement will be executed again. So we will be having 2 to 4 spaces here. Okay, we are using this one here. Let's make it 5. Now we have 2 and 2 4 spaces. Okay, we need to get to this 1. So in the next iteration, when I is equal to 3, this condition is again false. This statement will be executed and we will be having 3 times 2 spaces, 1, 2 and 3. In the next iteration, when I is equal to 2, again the condition is false. 1 is greater than or equal to 2, false. So this statement will be executed again and we will be having these many spaces here. So now in the next iteration, when j is equal to 1, I was equal to 1 and 1 is greater than or equal to 1, so this condition is true and I will be printed, that is 1 will be printed. Okay, so we are going to have these many spaces and after that we will be having 1 printed. So we will be having this first line printed as the required pattern. Okay, and in the successive iterations of I, same will happen. So let's execute it now, and here you can see the same required pattern we have. So from 3 loops we have gone into 2 loops and now we are going to reduce the number of lines here. Okay, we will be having 2 loops the same, but we are going to bypass these if and else condition check. Okay, but first let's generalize it. N is equal to 7, let's make it 5, and here n plus 1, not inclusive, here 5 5 same, so we are going to use n here and let's execute it. And now let's make it n is equal to 7 and here you can see the same required pattern. So we have generalized it. So now let's use method third. Here we are going to use the same outer loop for the rows and the inner loop for the columns, that is for printing the numbers. Okay, we are going to use a print statement inside here and here too. The print statement before the inner loop is for printing these spaces, these ones here. Okay, so we are using 2 spaces here, so we are going to make sure that we put 2 spaces in the single quotes, comma, and equals single quotes, nothing in there. Okay, so that it starts from the next line itself, so that we have these numbers printed in the same line. And inside the inner loop's print statement, we are going to use I here because I is printed I times. When I is equal to 1, 1 is printed 1 time, I is equal to 2, 2 is printed 2 times, and so on. Put a comma here and equals, in the single quotes give a space because we want a space between these numbers. Enter, and here use a print statement so that we make sure that in the next iteration of the outer loop we have the loop printing in the next line. So the outer loop will go from 1 to 6 not inclusive, that is it will run 5 times 1 to 5, and in the inner loop we are going to go from 0 to I. And now here we have spaces. We have to multiply the space with the number of times we want to print the space. So in the first iteration we have 4 spaces if we don't want to include the space between these two numbers, but if we want to include the space between these two numbers we will be having a multiple of 2 times of these spaces, that is we will be having 8 spaces. So we have used these 2 here, so we are going to multiply it with 4 in the first iteration. So to get that we going to subtract I from 5. So when I is equal to 1, the number of times spaces will be printed is 5 minus 1, that is 4. So we will be having 4 into 2 spaces here, that is right here, and after 8 spaces we will be having I printed, that is 1. And let's execute it right now, and here you can see that we have the required pattern. Okay, now we are going to generalize it. I is equal to 5, here 6 not inclusive, so we are going to put n plus 1 not inclusive, and here 5 5 same, so n, and execute it the same pattern. Let's make it bigger number, and here you can see the generalized pattern. Okay, now in the method 4 we are going to enumerate our string s. So let's make a string s, and here put the values 1 to 5, and we are going to use a for loop with the enumerate function. We are going to enumerate over the string s, and inside that first of all the values of I will be from 0, that is I is the index of the string s, so index starts from 0 to 1 less than the number of elements, that is I will go from 0 to 4 because we have 5 elements in here, and j is the element in the string s, that is the characters. So j values are 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay, so inside the loop we are going to use a print statement here, and inside the print statement first of all we make sure that we have the required number of spaces, and after that the numbers. All right, so in the first print statement we are going to print the spaces here and multiply the spaces with 4 minus I. So why we are using this 4 minus I? I, that is the index of the string s, and the index starts from 0, so 4 minus 0 is 4, so 4 times spaces will be printed, and we don't want these to go into the next line. So to make sure these stick to the same line we are using and equals single quotes here. So we have printed the spaces. Now we want to print the numbers, and for the numbers we are going to use a print statement here, and inside that we put star s brackets I colon I plus 1. I will make you clear it just a sec. I plus 1. So why we are printing this? We are using this star s because when the elements are printed, whether same or different, they are printed with a space in between. So it's an inbuilt property of the star s. Okay, star means all the elements ranging from I to I plus 1, that is we will be having only one single element because I plus 1 is not inclusive here, and it is multiplied with I plus 1, the number of times it is going to be printed. So when I is equal to 0, that is the index of the first element is picked up by this slicing, and it is printed 0 plus 1, that is 1 times. And let's execute it right now, and here you can see that the same required pattern. But the only drawback of this method is you have to add the elements here if you want it. You cannot change like this we did here for generalization. So if we have 8 elements here, we have to use 7 here, 1 less than 8, and execute it right now. and here you can see the required pattern. Okay, so we have 4 methods here. Now in the method 4, we are further going to reduce, method 5, we are further going to reduce the number of lines. This time we are going to use a while loop here. The while loop will go from I is equal to 1 and until I is less than 6. So the values of I will be going from 1 to 5. When it reaches 6, the loop exits. Print statement here, and inside the print statement we are going to use 2 spaces like we did here. Now the spaces are to be multiplied how many times? In the first 4 times, 3 times, 2 and 1. So when I is equal to 1, it should be multiplied 4 times. So how we get that? 5 minus I, right? So when I is equal to 1, the spaces will be printed 5 minus 1, that is 4 times. Plus we have to give string formatting we are going to use here. Okay, and in the curly braces we put I here with the space after that I, and we are going to multiply it I number of times. So let's understand this one here. This is string formatting. So whatever inside these curly braces is the variable, and it will be printed like this. And how many times do we want to print it? So when I is equal to 1, it will be printed 1 times. I is equal to 2, it will be printed, that is 2 will be printed 2 times, alright, with a space in between them. And make sure you increment the values of I. Okay, and let's execute it now. The same required pattern. So to generalize this, take a variable n is equal to 5, and in place of 6 we are going to put n plus 1, in place of 5 n, same required pattern, and let's make it 7, and that's it. We have this pattern. Let's go to the default one, and now we have reduced the number of lines to 4 lines if we don't generalize it. Okay, so in the method 6 we are going to further reduce the number of lines here. Okay, this time the method 6 is just a conversion of this while loop into the for loop. So I is equal to 1 for I in range 1 to 6. 6 is not inclusive, and inside that we are just going to copy and paste this statement here into here, and let's execute it right now. But value of n is equal to 5 here. Okay, and here you can see required pattern. What if we want to generalize it? N is equal to 5, put n here, and in place of 6 put n plus 1, and execute it right now. The same required pattern. Again we want to change the value of n is equal to 7, and here you can see that we have this pattern printed here. So this is the generalized case. Okay, so we have printed this pattern from these many loops and lines to just say 2 lines if we don't want to generalize it, or just 3 lines and a single loop. So we have increased the efficiency, decreased the program size. What else we want? Please subscribe to PyProTricks and Boost Up Station, and that's it for now.
Thank you for watching. Now it's time to discover more. Simply click on the screen to subscribe to our channel and watch another video to discover more.